และเห็นภาพประวัติศาสตร์ไปเมื่อ 15 ตุลาคมที่ผ่านมานะคะกับการลงนามร่างข้อตกลงสันติภาพค่ะระหว่างรัฐบาลฟิลิปปินส์และกลุ่มอิสลามโมโลนะคะหลังจากที่เกิดความขัดแย้งต่อเนื่องมา 40 ปีและความพยายามการพูดคุยกันอย่างมาราธอนตลอด 15 ปีในที่สุดก็บรรลุร่างข้อตกลงสันติภาพแต่ว่างานนี้เพิ่งจะเริ่มขึ้นนะคะยังมีรายละเอียดที่จะต้องเดินหน้าทำร่วมกันอีกมากมายค่ะเงื่อนไขที่เกิดขึ้นและจากนี้ไปความสุ่มเสี่ยงคืออะไรนะคะวันนี้ดิฉันจะคุยกับผู้ประกาศข่าวและผู้สื่อข่าวจากอัลจาซีราค่ะเป็นชาวฟิลิปปินส์ที่ลงพื้นที่ที่เกาะมินดาเนาหลายครั้งนะคะเชื่อว่าคุณผู้ชมอาจจะคุ้นหน้ากันดีนะคะกับคุณเวโรนิก้าเพรโดซาค่ะนอกจากจะเป็นผู้สื่อข่าวของอัลจาซีราแล้วยังทำงานด้านการเคลื่อนไหวนะคะเพื่อสันติภาพด้วยค่ะ Thank you Veronica for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
For you were in Mindanao last year.
That's the last time I was there, yes.
Yeah, and this historic signing of the draft of peace agreement, is it beyond your imagination that it happened?
Well, it is really a historic turning point. I have to give them that. But it has been in the making for some time. There has been a sense of optimism about the peace process since it restarted after the election of this new Philippines president, Benigno Aquino III. Since then, you have seen a kind of change of mood amongst the negotiators. Slowly, this sense that something could really happen. And then the news, a couple of days before the actual signing on Monday, that came out that they had reached a framework agreement. It's not a draft, it is an actual agreement, but it's only a framework.
Why has it come true right at this moment during the President Aquino?
Well, I think there are a number of factors. It is an extremely complex situation on the ground. I don't want to kind of understate that, but I think the most important factors were, first of all, that this was a president who was very serious about reaching a peace agreement. Right at the start, he set it out as a priority. He put people in place who also were very serious about reaching a peace agreement. He also has a lot of support among local politicians who, during the last attempt at reaching a peace agreement in 2008, had effectively prevented that agreement from taking place by bringing a case at the Supreme Court. So you have, on the Philippine Christian side, as it were, political will as the crucial element. On the Moro side, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, you have some serious people who really want to deliver some dividends to the Muslim minority, who they see as being extremely marginalized. And it's true that if you look at the development indices for that region, if you look at how it's doing with the rest of the states in the Philippines is a huge archipelago, as you know, but these are absolutely at the rock bottom. The ones that are going to be in this Bangsamoro, the Muslim majority ones, they are the bottom three, in fact, when it comes to poverty, when it comes to mortality rates, health, those kind of things. It is really a very sad situation there. So they also point out that the next generation following them will not be so ready to make peace. So I think they felt that they wanted to leave a legacy and that this was a great window of opportunity.
Yes.
They saw a president who could deliver. There is no love lost between the Philippine government and these negotiators.
Did you mean they were sure from the day one that President Aquino, when he took up the post, that this is the right guy to make peace with us?
No. They were not. In fact, there's an anecdote. In fact, I spoke to the negotiators when they were in Kuala Lumpur a few years ago, 2010, during the presidential elections. And they pointed out that they would like a candidate, when I asked them who they would like to see as president, overseeing the peace process, they didn't point out Aquino, but they did point out someone that they liked because they felt that he could deliver.
They didn't believe him from the beginning?
Well, no, not at first. I think the thing is, you know, politicians say all sorts of things, and you don't really know whether they can actually deliver. And they were terribly burned by what happened in 2008. They were very disappointed because they really thought that they had reached an incredible, you know, point of agreement between the Philippines and the Moro population. They didn't. It collapsed on the day before it happened. The Supreme Court case was brought out, and the whole thing had to be thrown into the dustbin. So it was a terrible situation. And so the most important thing for them was to find someone who could deliver. It so happened, as things transpired, that President Aquino turned out to be that person.
That means the turning point has happened during the past 2 years.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's true.
What he has done the most to make they change their mind to finally settle for the peace agreement?
Actually, I would say that they have not changed their mind. Let me show you. This is a book that the Asia Foundation printed. This is a book of all the agreements that have reached between the Philippines and the insurgent group since 1997. There are a lot of them. There has been really not that much of a shift. I mean, the really important shift happened several years ago when the MILF decided that they didn't want to claim an independent state, right? They were going to settle for an autonomous region.
When did they make that decision?
Several years ago. This was some time ago.
And you see it as a turning point?
That was not the turning point. I think, the turning point for them was to see that this man was willing to go the extra mile, away from the public eye.
Like what?
Like he went to Japan last year to meet with the leader of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, Al-Hajj Murad Ibrahim, and that no head of state had ever done that before, except, I mean, I suppose you could count President Aquino's mother when she was president back in 1987, and I happened to be there. And it was an extraordinary sight to see her arrive with the Secretary of Defense and the Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines when they arrived for the first meeting with the head of the MNLF, which was the biggest insurgent group at the time. The tension was absolutely palpable. You could really feel it because this was something that had never been attempted before. And perhaps, I don't know, this President Aquino has followed in his mother's footsteps to a certain extent because he went to Japan to meet someone that really, is an enemy under the kind of current political situation, but because they saw an opportunity for peace.
President Aquino said this time in his palace, the devil is in the detail.
Yes.
So actually, this has just started for the peace agreement. What do you see as risky factors from now on until they can reach comprehensive deal?
As a matter of fact, what we're into now is the most fragile period for this peace agreement, as I see it. Because all that they've signed are the bare bones of what a final agreement could look like. It is merely a statement of the obligations of both sides in order to put the final agreement into place. When it comes to actual, gritty issues that people have fought over for years about ancestral domain, about wealth sharing, about power, those are all going to be discussed from now until the end of the year. They are hoping to reach that final agreement till the end of the year. With this signing and with the announcement of it, other parties who have also been at war, like the Moro National Liberation Front that I mentioned earlier, they have already said that they are not going to be included into this situation and that it will simply lead to renewed hostilities.
What will the life of local people in Mindanao, in Bangsamoro, will be changed from now on? What do they have to do to convince people that this change is good for them?
I think the most important thing is peace. This is an area that has seen something like 100,000 deaths over the last 20 years. This is not Iraq, this is not Afghanistan, right? This is not far from Thailand. This is an hour or two's flight from here to there. It's not remote. 100,000 deaths, something like 500,000 displaced people right across the region. They are displaced seasonally. Every time something happens, they have to leave their farms. They come back, all their fruit is rotten, all their crops are rotten. Their animals have run away. It's a really tenuous way of life. So they are fed up, I would say, and they have suffered as a result. They're underdeveloped compared to the rest of the country. Well, if they can be told that this is a chance for stability, I don't think that has to be that much. But I think the most important thing will be that under the agreement they have direct say in what happens in their region through the mechanism that is being proposed, this Bangsa Moro entity, and its kind of parliamentary system, they're calling it. So it's within the national entity, but it's autonomous. And that, I think, is the crucial selling point for the Moro Islamic Liberation Front.
Do you see the initiative has to come from political will to tackle the violence in Mindanao first?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not. And I think another thing is that it's political will that comes from a real acknowledgement of the situation on the ground and of a certain amount of enlightenment, of seeing the long, the big picture, that in the long run it will be better for the country to not have a conflict going on in the south. Already there is talk of development, of construction projects, of foreign investment, and this is something that all us developing economies need, right? Let's see if it ends up being right for the people down there, the right kinds of development, the right kinds of economic growth, but at least they're deciding for themselves.
How do you see the role of Malaysia Prime Minister? Prime Minister Najib Razak was also in the signing ceremony on 15th of October. How important it is?
It's extremely important, absolutely crucial, but also it has been controversial. Make no mistake, certainly in the Philippines and in Malaysia. I lived in Malaysia for about 5 years before I moved here to Bangkok. And Malaysian journalists would say, we're doing so much, we've given so much. And if you think about it, they have. They would invite both sides. They'd stay in hotels and get fed. And, it was all on the Malaysian taxpayers' kind of coin, as it were. So but they were willing to make this commitment in order to see that there is peace for this Muslim minority.
Who has to take them in from the beginning, the Philippines government or Moro?
From the beginning, both sides did it. It's because, and also though the international community was very heavily involved as well. They were involved in a peace agreement that happened back in the 90s with the MNLF as well. But in the end, Libya was the mediator for that set of talks. This time, Malaysia took that role. And the controversial part, though, was sometimes the Philippine government simply didn't trust what was going on. If relations between Malaysia and Philippines were not going well, they would see it as reflected within the peace negotiations. I know there was a lot of suspicion around one mediator in particular, who was the chief mediator up until the election of President Aquino. The Malaysians replaced him. And I think that was another factor that made this agreement possible. So there was that support from Malaysia, and then there was also that point at which they, in recent months, that they have made a step that has made such a difference.
You just mentioned Libya, that it supported MNLF.
Yes, it did, yes.
I'm just wondering this time whether the decision of MILF has something to do with the fall down of Libya. That's why it speed up the process of peace agreement.
I think that's very astute of you to notice that, because I think what is happening in the Middle East at the moment with the so-called Arab awakening will have repercussions in Muslim communities right around the world. I think it certainly has in the Philippines. I think that I would not be at all surprised if it was a trigger to the MILF's feeling that they should really wrap up an agreement as soon as possible. Who knows where this could take us? Even here in Thailand, from what I know, and I'm no expert at it, I'm sure you know much more than I do about it, but there are certain issues within Arab awakening, such as sectarianism, that are becoming more pronounced recently, since that happened. So, I think a lot of communities are thinking about that.
Undeniably, this case of peace agreement, the historic signing, will be quite a role model for Thailand to be achieving or to take part in peace process in the south of Thailand. What do you think Thailand can learn the most from this case of the Philippines and Moro?
I think this issue of political will. I think, decision makers have to decide whether they really want peace. And if one side's decision makers decide that they do, and the other side don't really believe it, or they're arguing amongst themselves, it won't happen. Both sides need to be in a position where they can say, this is what we want. My impression is that the Thai political system, political scene at the moment is rather fragmented, that the same can be said in the south. So negotiations are rather difficult because who do you negotiate with? And there's that issue that I mentioned in the Philippines.
Yes.
If, this administration agrees to something, can they deliver in the long run? Because of the tumultuous situation about whether or not they can really see anything through. So, this is a lesson that it can be done. It can be done, but, the circumstances have to be there and the will has to be there. And the belief that peace is better than war for everyone. Everyone, even people who are not involved in the war, us far away in Bangkok, it's still much better for us to be in a peaceful country.
In Thailand, maybe it cannot compare directly because the atmosphere, the historical background is so different. Because in Thailand, we are still not sure what the government is fighting with in the south of Thailand. In this case, do you think for the Philippines government, you have Moro, you have MILF, have MNLF, is it easier to deal with because you know who are you talking with?
I think that's absolutely right. Yes, yes. Which makes me wonder whether this insurgency here wanted, because there was no kind of public relations to claim any attack, this attack or that attack or whatever. They didn't seem to want to use publicity for a further political aim. That's very worrying. But there are people to talk to that you can persuade, I'm sure. But it's just a question of doing the legwork, doing the talking, having the willpower just to reach out and to try and being ready to do that as well, because that's an enormous kind of step as well. In the Philippines, there's a certain amount of familiarity because there had been talks going on for so long.
Yes,
right.
15 years.
So confidence had been built. That's another thing. So, I don't know whether your situation in Thailand, you are back in 1987, 1997. You see what I mean? Yeah, it's a different timeline. You're absolutely right. It is completely different. Yeah.
Some Thai analysts say that the Moro case and the Philippine government case happen just right here at the moment because of we are approaching ASEAN community in 2015 and we have a lot to lose if we cannot achieve peace. In this case, the Philippines. Do you think it will be pushing factor for other countries in ASEAN to learn from the case of Moro and Philippines government?
Yes, but I don't know how much. If domestic political pressures to maintain the conflict, remember I was talking about how they tend to sustain themselves because certain people get more power, certain people get more resources as a result of the war, then that's an enormous challenge, right? Even if there are some enlightened leaders who can see during the long run that pragmatically this is something that will be better for the whole country, for the whole region, that doesn't matter to somebody who is, getting more power, getting, I don't know, whatever influence as a result of the actual fighting.
ค่ะเป็นมุมมองจากคุณเวโรนิก้านะคะผู้สื่อข่าวฟิลิปปินส์นะคะที่ลงพื้นที่เป็นอย่างมากและได้เห็นภาพนะคะเบื้องหลังกว่าที่จะมาถึงวันลงนามในข้อตกลงสันติภาพที่เกิดขึ้นนะคะที่เราได้เห็นกันไปแล้วเมื่อ15ตุลาคมระหว่างกลุ่มอิสลามโมโรกับรัฐบาลฟิลิปปินส์ค่ะและน่าจะเป็นอีกบทเรียนหนึ่งนะคะที่กระบวนการสันติภาพในภาคใต้ก็อาจจะนำมาปรับใช้ได้ค่ะทั้งหมดคือตอบโจทย์สำหรับคืนนี้ค่ะดิฉันณัฐฐา โกมลวาทินสวัสดีค่ะ